Walkthrough for the activity Debug Concatenate. So at the top here we have our starter code as per usual, followed by the debugging tips. And if you haven't already, I strongly recommend you have a read of the Comp 1511 debugging guide. And then here we have the task. So this exercise concatenates the strings passed as command line arguments, excluding the file name. Currently it has some issues and it's our job to figure them out and fix the code. Additionally, we need to think of ways we could refactor the starter code to produce a simpler solution. So here we have our examples. So we can see that these are passed in as command line arguments and are just concatenated into one big string, excluding the name of the executable file. We can see that if there's no command line arguments, an empty string is printed. Finally, at the bottom, we have our style and auto test commands. So I've just got the starter code here, and let's just compile it to see if there's any immediate issues that occur when we do so. Okay, so we do get 2 warnings, and let's have a look at what's going on. So it says ordered comparison between a pointer and an integer on line 16 and 26. So that's happening like here and here. So we can see that we're doing I is less than argv. So if we know command line arguments, we know that argv stands for argument vector, which is a pointer to an array of strings. We can't really be comparing an integer with an array. However, we do know that argc stands for argument count, the number of command line arguments. And it seems like that's what we were intending to do. And there might be a little bit of a bug there. So let's fix that up to use argc instead of argv. Okay, so it seems to compile, which is great. Let's run it and see what happens. And let's just put a very simple string for it to concatenate. Okay. So we get some errors, we have some uninitialized values, and indexes are going out of ranges. Things are not going as planned. So honestly, my best strategy for code that looks like this is to just go through it line by line and see if we can simplify anything, because there's some nested loops, and when we start doing that, it can get a little messy. So let's consider this first chunk of code at the top here. We initialize and declare a variable, total length, and it seems as though that for each element in the array, so for each string, we're then counting the number of characters in each string. Because command line arguments are arrays of strings, we actually don't need to be looking at it character by character, and instead we can use the string len function, which finds the length of a string in the string.h library. And that will pretty much do what this loop is doing for us. So that's nice and can simplify things a little. And then we create a result array, which is fine. And then it seems as though for each command line argument, we're finding the length of it. So again, we can do just something like this, and that gets rid of that loop. And then this second loop looks like it's adding each individual element from argv, so each character in the strings, to the result, which can be simplified, but we'll get to that in a moment. And then finally, it looks like we're printing our string, and we're printing it character by character, which is a little inefficient when we have functions that can print strings for us. So let's use our fputs function, and we want to fputs our result to standard out. Cool. And let's delete this now that we've converted it. Okay, so you can see that we've already significantly simplified this code, but I do want to simplify this loop a little bit. So let's think of a way we can do it. There is something called string cat in C, which might be helpful because it does concatenate strings, and that's what we're doing here. So instead of doing this loop, what we can do is we can call the string cat function, and we pass in the destination string and then the source. So we want our thing to be stored in result, and we want to add argv to the result string. So let's do that. And cool. Let's now recompile and see what happens. Okay, unused variable, no worries. Delete those. We also don't need this one. Recompile again. And let's run our program. Okay, so it seems like something's still going wrong, And we're having some issues with uninitialized variables and result. So dynamic stack buffer overflow. We're running into some issues. And I think that's because we're trying to concatenate something that's uninitialized with a string. So let's initialize a little bit of it. Let's just let the first thing be the null terminating character or an empty string. And let's see if this fixes what we want. Not quite. Hello. Okay, so it's getting better though. But it is still the same error message, which is quite interesting. Let's add 1 to allow space for the null terminator at the end and see if that was the issue. Okay, so that was the issue, is that the total length, the string len doesn't count the null terminator, and we do want to add a final null terminator at the end of our string. But we can see that this doesn't quite work yet because we don't want to have the file name. So what we can do is we know that the first command line argument is the file name. So that'll be the 0th element of our array. So we can just start from element 1 instead. And let's see if this fixes it up. Perfect. So it looks as though this is doing what we expect. Let's try some of the more involved examples. Okay, that seems to work. We'll try this one. Seems to work. Try this one. That looks good. And let's try an empty string. That also looks good. So now let's run auto test and make sure those pass. Great, it seems as though those are passing as expected. And finally, let's check that our code style is good. Looks like I'm missing the header comment, so let's fill this in. Add my name, my ZID, and today's date. Let's just say July of 2023. And let's rerun that, make sure it passes, and it looks good. So this is the final solution for the debug concatenate exercise.